Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Perigo. I'm Lindsay Perigo and I'm dangerous. Perigo is Portuguese for danger, and that's what I seek to be to the enemies of reason, freedom and excellence who unfortunately rule the world in some way, shape or form. Now first, a word about why I left you so abruptly and why I'm back so fleetingly. I got another job. One where I think for the moment I can better serve reason, freedom and excellence, at least till the election. Press Secretary to the Parliamentary Leader of the ACT Party. I had to start immediately, which is why I was gone without so much as a by your leave. My apologies. So why am I here now? Well, among the people we had in mind to interview sometime soon was Roger Kerr, Chief Executive of the Business Roundtable. Roger, as you probably know, has terminal cancer, but he's not going down without a fight. And his quest for the most advanced treatment on the planet made it difficult for us to pin him down to an interview date. By the time he let us know when he could be available, I'd already gone. But once we had a date, I suggested to Jim Blackman, the head of Stratos, Don Brash and John Boscawen, my ACT Party bosses, and to Gerard Smith, the executive producer here, that I should take time out to do this interview, and Stratos should adapt its schedule to accommodate it. Roger Kerr is a national treasure, and this could be one of the few remaining opportunities to mark that fact in his presence. Everyone was in agreement, so here we are. When Roger's illness was made public, there was an outpouring of that unique kind of hatred only the left seemed to be capable of. One poster on one political blog said, now I'm quoting, "He's getting what he deserves. Millions of ordinary Kiwis have suffered because of his greed and desire to turn us all into a nation of slaves. Let's see you try to take all your money with you now, you traitor. This is why God exists, because there must be a hell for evil of the likes of Roger Kerr, Ruth Richardson, Jenny Shipley, Roger Douglas, etc., etc. Actually, there is a place beyond hate, which is how ordinary Germans felt about Jews, caused by years of hardship and suffering, and it is where my reaction to Roger Kerr et al. Is, and I would quite happily send the Business Roundtable to the gas chambers, and their families too. Why? Because we must get the evil out of the gene pool." Unquote. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're up against in this country. Generations of New Zealanders conditioned to believe they shouldn't have to pay for anything, that the world, via the government, owes them a living, and any expectation they should make any effort themselves is a cosmic impertinence. Government should be all-providing and all-powerful. Not merely mediocrity, but sub-mediocrity is the goal. And those who would beckon us to a higher path should be gassed and damned to hell for it. This envy and hate-ridden, mindless, soulless, and soul-destroying mentality brought us to the brink of catastrophe in 1984 and is threatening now to do so again. Roger Kerr has fought the good fight against it for decades. Whatever they've said about him, though, most of his detractors have grudgingly respected him. In their hearts, they know he's right. The prosperity of all of us depends on wealth creation, and wealth creation flourishes under conditions of small government, minimal regulation, and low taxes, underpinned by personal freedom and responsibility. Hanker though they might for the former Soviet Union or East Germany, the present-day North Korea or Zimbabwe, the socialists know that if prosperity rather than equality of destitution is our goal, then the Roger Kerrs of this world are on the money. Roger Kerr, a very warm welcome to this Perigo special. Lovely to see you. You're looking really well, but I must ask you, first of all, how in fact are you?
I am well. I have a melanoma that's spread. I haven't made any secret of that, and I've been looking out for treatment options, not just here, although the advice from Wellington Hospital, my oncologist there, Catherine Barrow, I think has been excellent. I've also been to Sydney and to Melbourne and to Houston about 3 weeks ago. All the advice is consistent. I'll be starting on a new treatment regime next week, and although melanoma is a very nasty beast, I'm hopeful that we might find a solution to it.
You're availing yourself of a new drug called Yervoy?
That's correct.
And that's one of two new wonder drugs on the market, or one of them's about to come onto the market.
That's correct. A lot has been going on in melanoma science, as I've discovered at a very fast rate over the last several months. It's the hot topic amongst oncologists, and at long last, because there's been no real new developments for about 25 years, there's a much better understanding, I think, of the issue, and some therapies now that are starting to make some inroads. But none of them are king hits. They're all relatively modest probabilities of producing benefits, but the one I'm on, if successful, could produce some long-lasting ones.
So yours is at, what, stage 4 is it called at the moment?
Yes, I had a primary about 3 years ago, and the idea was to try to prevent spread to the rest of the body, but a scan last October showed up that it had spread, and that it has been progressing since. So this is the outcome of growing up on a farm, being in the sun all the summer.
Is that what they've said? It's
bound to be that. My older brother, Alan Kerr, who's been a cardiac surgeon at Auckland Hospital, had a primary about 3 or 5 months before I did, actually, and his hasn't spread, but he's at risk as well. So it's not unexpected. We didn't know about all the risks of melanoma in those days, and now we've learnt to our cost.
It tends to be the case that if you're alive 5 years after treatment, then you're alive for the rest of your life, obviously. But this one has come back after 3 years.
No, it spread after the 3 years, yeah. I mean, if it had just been a primary, as many people have, and had been excised and there were no subsequent effects, there wouldn't be an issue. But you're right, if you make it to about 5 years, the odds are pretty good after that. But at 1 year, there's only a 25% rate of survival. So the game has to be to try to stay around long enough in the hope that some of these new therapies are coming along and will work.
Will be even better. Before I go any further, congratulations on your recent honour. Now, I get confused by these things. It's the Companion something...
Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, I think.
Well, you were nearly confused too.
That's right. Well, that came out of left field, but that was very nice.
Now, and that's just below a knighthood?
Yes, I think that's where it is in the rankings.
Are you disappointed wasn't it a knighthood?
No, I don't think a knighthood would fit very well.
I'm disappointed, and I think it ought to be Sir Roger, and I certainly think that if anyone deserves it, it's you. Let me take you back to 1984. The country was broke. Polish shipyard is the expression I think David Longer used to describe the way it was run. The population believed in everything that led to it being a Polish shipyard, cradle to grave welfare, big government that ran everything, and so on and so forth. Tall poppy syndrome, the lot. And that government of David Longer, an unlikely government to do what it did what it did, stopped for a breather and a cup of tea. Then National came in and they restarted the process. And they stopped for a breather and a cup of tea. Ultimate upshot, in 2011, we're back where we were in 1984. We're broke again, and all the rest of it. Was it all a waste of time?
I don't think it was a waste of time. I look at the glass as half full rather than half empty. I think an important factor there is how long it took us to wake up to the fact that New Zealand, Fortress New Zealand policies were not taking us anywhere. And it was a courageous Labor government that set about dismantling that previous regime. It's often said that they didn't have a mandate to do it. People forget that they were re-elected in 1986 with an increased majority, actually, and then, as you say, we had that cup of tea. And I do think for the last 15 years or so, under governments of all stripes of politics, we have lost the plot again. We have not carried on doing things to keep on upgrading the economy. And it took us a long time in the last decade to realise that a government that talked the talk about wanting to get up into the top half of the OECD was basically a con in terms of that message. So this government is now wrestling with more serious economic problems than we've had since 1984.
You have a problem with the political dynamic, don't you, when the population are not au fait with the rationale, much less approving thereof, for reform. And I often say if there's been a revolution, it hasn't been inside people's heads. How do you get that revolution going so that as the reforms occur, the population are actually embracing them?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. It all depends on public understanding in the final analysis, the degree of economic literacy that a country has. And I think that was significantly improved for a while. I think it's been maintained in the sense that even the Clark-Cullen government did not alter the basic fundamentals of the economic framework of the economy now, although they did a lot of damage to it. Over in Australia, for example, governments have more consistently kept on explaining the need for Australia to keep on reforming, to keep on modernising. Alternative parties there almost compete to declare themselves the most reformist party. We have not really had public opinion that has pushed New Zealand governments in that fashion, and it took them, well, 3 terms really to work out that the Clark-Cullen government was not taking the country anywhere.
Roger, I reckon if you had a referendum on the subject, a majority would vote to renationalise telecom. And of course, air and rail were renationalised under that Clark-Cullen government. The point I'm driving at, I wonder if you're familiar with Antonio Gramsci and his long march through the culture.
Yes.
And that was a very smart communist who realised that promoting armed revolution wasn't going to cut it as a means of instituting communist regimes around the world. So the thing to do was infiltrate all the major institutions of the culture, the schools in particular and universities, and insidiously bring people around to a Marxist point of view. And I would submit that that strategy has been spectacularly successful, and that's why you can't have free market reforms, because the culture is anti the free market.
I think there's quite a lot in what you say, but I'll just mention a couple of different points perhaps. I think if you look at polls, polls in this country generally are anti-privatisation by a certain majority, maybe 60% or something like that. I doubt if it's a very deep-seated feeling, though. I don't think it is necessarily going to cost the government anything to go into the election with seeking a mandate for some partial privatisation. And take another issue, take the age for New Zealand superannuation. The Prime Minister, unfortunately I think, has said that he would not raise it while he was Prime Minister. I rather suspect if the government were to go to the country in a referendum on that subject, explained how it would be done, not starting for 5 years, doing it steadily over a period of time, looking after people in transition, I believe there would be a good chance actually that you would get support for that. So I do think New Zealanders understand these things if you put them across well. Governments long ago gave up making the case for privatisation, but I do agree with you absolutely that in so many of our institutions, schools most importantly, there is not an upbringing, if you like, where entrepreneurship, risk-taking, business and so forth is valued and supported. And
lauded, rather treated as evil. And what we have to be doing instead is saving the planet. Are you a global warming sceptic, by the way? Man-made global warming?
I certainly resist the proposition that the science is settled, there's a consensus. I mean, science is never settled, and there are many very distinguished scientists who do not subscribe to the official UN IPCC view of the world there. Some of the so-called skeptical scientists will acknowledge that perhaps there might be a slight degree of warming over the next century, human-induced. And I think it's very important that our government keeps cool-headed about that science issue and also does not get ahead of the rest of the world.
Which is what it is doing with the ETS.
To some degree with the ETS.
And this whole idea of treating carbon dioxide as a pollutant is just nonsense. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to know that. But it is the theology that the world is being seduced by.
Well, that's right, and you know, it's probably the most far-reaching piece of new regulation that we've had in the country in recent time. And if it were to get cranked up, we would be imposing some very significant economic costs on ourselves to very little effect, because New Zealand doesn't count in the scheme of things.
Just coming back to privatisation versus government ownership, I wonder sometimes if private enterprise isn't its own worst enemy. I'm thinking again of, say, telecom. And people get fed up to the back teeth with not being able to get through to human beings. You get this dial 1 for this and dial 2 for that. If you do finally get a human being, it's someone in the Philippines who can't speak English. That is very frustrating. And everyone says, oh, bring back the days when the government ran it and there was a human being on the other end of the phone. What do you say to that?
Getting through to the Philippines call centre, I think, has probably got very little to do with telecom, but I do agree with you that that's yet another debate that's been seriously confused. I mean, people forget, for example, what telecommunications services were like here when the post office ran it, you know, weeks to get a telephone, only 2 colours, black and white, and that kind of thing. After telecom was first of all corporatised and then privatised, there was an incredible rate of productivity growth in that sector and an absolute explosion of new services and falling costs for all of those services. But once again, I think there were parties, including telecom, that did not do a very good job of explaining what was going on there. And we have got back into a very heavy regulatory mindset around telecommunications again, the last aspect of which is the government getting back into the game with its broadband investment.
Why shouldn't government do these things? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
Well, the basic proposition is that on average and over time, and that qualification is extremely important, all the evidence indicates that privately owned businesses function more efficiently, more profitably, go in for more investment, employ more people than government-owned enterprises. We've had about 30 privatisations in this country. The only ones that people grizzle about are Air New Zealand and Transrail. We could go into those. I don't think they're actually examples of failed privatisation. Business is risky, after all. That can happen in...
Well, should they just have been allowed to go under?
Well, that's a very plausible proposition, I think.
Well, that's the market solution, isn't it?
Well, it is the market.
Be free to fail.
Exactly. And there was, at one point of time, with Air New Zealand, certainly a possibility that Singapore Airlines would have bought into the company. And with respect to rail, why did the government have to bail out, as it were, toll at an absolutely exorbitant price? And the taxpayer now will be facing endless losses for years to come. Bill English said, I think, quite nicely, that's the price of nostalgia.
What about television? We have a publicly owned television network, but it's behaving like private enterprise and it's driving down the quality of everything to the lowest common denominator. Isn't that inherently what private enterprise does? I am, of course, playing devil's advocate here, Roger.
Well, there are splendid private television channels internationally, as you well know, and New Zealanders can access most of them very readily now. So the only policy issue in that debate, as I see it, is a case for public broadcasting doing something that commercial channels, or radio stations for that matter, wouldn't otherwise do. I think that case has got weaker over the years. I'm prepared to entertain it, but I don't think it justifies the state actually being in the business of owning television or radio stations.
Well, in fact, you see, the network that is doing all the things that supposedly the state remained in television to do, all of those things are now being done by Sky. Documentaries, the History Channel, classic movies, National Geographic, all the serious stuff. The only problem is it keeps being interrupted by Harvey Norman commercials.
Well, the alternative, or one alternative to that, is the taxpayer having to fund it, of course. I mean, I think a New Zealand on air kind of concept, if you can satisfy yourself that you will get what the genuine supporters of public broadcasting would like, the late Dennis Duttons of the world, for example, the way to go would be to contract with private channels or radio stations to deliver those kind of goods, and I'd be open to that kind of experiment.
Where do you get your values from? I mean, these values have sustained you now for decades, most of your life. I don't think that you were like Don Brash and myself, who started out as crazy lefties. Did you have a phase of that?
Well, I did do my master's honours thesis on Jean-Paul Sartre, who was as communist as you could get.
Yes, that's pretty bad.
I don't believe I was really into the ideology. I was into his literary criticism. But I didn't form a particular view for some time. I'd missed out on economics, which actually I regard as my basic discipline, until somewhat later. It was when I was in the New Zealand Embassy in Brussels at the time of the negotiations of the UK to join the EEC that I started to realise that New Zealand's problems were not that other countries put up barriers to our trade, although that was an issue. It was basically because our main problems were self-inflicted, and so we had this hugely interventionist, unfree kind of economy. We had all sorts of other repressive things in terms of individual freedoms at that time, and gradually I came to understand that this made no sense. And so over time I've formed a more liberal view, I guess, across a range of issues. And but
you mean liberal in the classic sense?
In the classical sense, and that continues to inform me and add to my understanding of economics.
But I mean, even before you're doing a master's degree, in your childhood, did you have things like self-reliance inculcated into you, or was that all your own work?
Yeah, I grew up in a farming family out of Nelson. My parents were humble, hard-working people. My mother, I think, was quite an extraordinary person. She had a master's degree in the 1920s, and that would have been pretty unusual for a woman at that stage, but she was a very unassuming kind of person. But yes, that was exactly the family ethos, you know, work hard, get a good education, uphold all the civic values that you would want, and that's been an important issue.
I bet you were nerdy, were you?
My mother got me off to a good start, I think, in terms of, you know, reading and writing and all of that kind of thing. So I found I was doing well at high school and, you know, topped the country, I think, for school cert and then scholarship, or close to it. And, you know, went on and did a good degree subsequently. In many ways, I think there was a fair degree of toil and hard work associated with that, as opposed to innate brilliance. I could always identify students who I thought were more clever than me in any topic, but I got there through perseverance.
You have children of your own. How are they doing?
I'm very proud of my children. My eldest son is in Silicon Valley. He's a tech type there, has worked for IBM, Yahoo, now Microsoft. My second son is also working for Microsoft, as it happens, in Seattle, but he's on the marketing side of things. He's following a general executive career. My third one is in Wellington. It's good to have one still at home working for Telstra there.
They're all about 10 feet tall, as I recall. Even taller than you.
A little bit taller than me, not gigantic.
A new wife?
Yes, that's right. My wife is Catherine Isaac. I just adore her to the moon and back. She's just a wonderful, clever, able person who's been supporting me through this latest challenge enormously.
Well, I have very bad news for you, Roger. I saw her long before you did. 35 years ago, in fact. We worked together at Avalon on a TV program called Tonight at 9. She was a researcher and I was the presenter at that time,
right,
alternating with Sharon Crosby and Ian Johnston. So I have first dibs, I'm afraid. What does Roger Kerr believe happens after death? Do you have any religious convictions?
I very strongly respect the role of the church. Catherine and I were married in a Church of England church last year. My brother-in-law has been a Church of England person and a missionary in Africa, married to my sister. So I think the Church has played a very important role in civilizations over the centuries. Personally, I'm not religious in the sense of believing in life after death and so forth, but I'll never knock the Church's role in society.
Well, may it be a long time before you have to find out, Roger. All the best in the battles ahead. Thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And my thanks to Roger Kerr for being my guest on this Perigo special tonight. This program will be up on YouTube tomorrow night. All previous Perigos are up there too. When this one goes up, think about leaving a comment complimenting Roger on a job well done and a life well lived. It's too late after they've gone. If you'd like to contact me about tonight's program, email me at linz@lindsayperigo.com. Linz, L-I-N-Z, Liberty in New Zealand, at lindsayperigo.com. What you're hearing now is tonight's music gem from the romantic genre. This is the Nimrod variation from Sir Edward Elgar's Enigma variations, played by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Sir Daniel Barenboim. Till next time, and yes, there'll be a next time, I'll be back. For reason, freedom and excellence, I'm Lindsay Perigo. Good night and good premises.